Okay, how's the sound for everybody? Cool. I'm going to wander into the frame. Okay, here I am. Now they can actually see me. So, thanks everybody for coming tonight. This is our second apprenticeship info session, and we're streaming this one, so hello to Outer-Towners. What we are going to be doing tonight, I'm going to talk quite a bit about how the apprenticeship program works, of course. I'm going to kind of try to talk a good bit about whether it's a good fit for you and how to figure that out. Try to talk a good bit about what we've seen about what helps people be successful, and some things like, what might be a good sign this is a good fit for you. Things we've seen with apprentices that we've been able to help them overcome, and things that we haven't been as successful with. And we want to try to give you a really good feel for where you need to be at to be ready for apprenticeship, what apprenticeship looks like, what the process is for finding apprentices and placing them on teams, all of that kind of thing. And then we're also going to look at some example apps that previous apprentices have used for the coding portion, because we're going to have you, we don't try to say this is the app you need to build. We did that at one point, but we found it works a lot better when people come up with their own apps that they're excited about. But it helps a lot to have some other examples to kind of see where people are at and what people have done in the past. And we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. I'm not still muted. Are you hearing me okay? Yeah, good. I'm not still muted. Okay, cool. So let's jump right in. So I thought I'd start with kind of the backstory of the apprenticeship program and how it came about. I guess I should start by introducing myself a little bit, since not everybody knows who I am. I'm Chris Nelson. I kind of came up with the apprenticeship program that we do here at Gaslight. I'm also one of the co-founders of Gaslights, so been a developer for a long time. I actually have a CS degree from UC in '96, so I went the more traditional approach. But my entire career, I've worked with people that did have CS degrees and people who didn't, and have found that absolutely people without degrees can be everybody's successful, and have been interested for a long time in how we can make the field of software development more approachable. I have a CS degree, but what I saw as like what I actually use day to day is mostly very different than I learned about in school. And the thing with this field is it's really a field where you're constantly learning. So it's not like we can give you a body of knowledge and say, okay, here's everything you need to know about programming. You're good for the next 20 years. You're not even good for the next 6 months. It's just really crazy, both good and bad. If you like constant learning, this is absolutely the field for you. And if finding new and better ways to do things all the time is interesting, you're going to do well, and this is going to be great, and it's going to be fun. If it's like scary and terrifying, it's going to be scary and terrifying. It's just kind of like the key skill is really continuing to learn, and also there's kind of a thing that you have to get comfortable with, where you can't possibly know everything, and your job is going to be figuring stuff out and doing stuff that nobody's there to tell you how to do, and making a mess of things sometimes, and you just gotta have you get to eventually develop a comfortable level with a comfortableness with not really knowing what the heck you're doing a lot of the times, because that's really actually the job. But back to how this came about. We started Gaslight 2008, so it was like in the middle of the worst recession ever, right? It's a great time to start a company, but it worked out okay for us so far. But the field of software development and programming was relatively unaffected. I won't say it was completely unaffected. I mean, there was absolutely a downturn. It was harder to find gigs and jobs and stuff then than it is now, for sure. But compared to the level of just catastrophe going on in the rest of the economy, it was like, I mean, it's a little harder to find a gig than it was. I mean, maybe I have to call 10 people instead of 2, but it wasn't that bad. And it just made us think that, like, what if we could, help people that are affected by the massive unemployment going on, and at least for the ones that were into it, make the field of programming and software development more accessible. And we realized even then there were a ton of people that, you can learn to code and do this job whether or not you have a degree, and it didn't seem to matter that much. And about this time, we saw things like Bootcamps come out, and some of the first ones came out about that time. And the first one I knew about was a guy that I knew from the Ruby community. Ruby is a programming language that we have used a lot here at Gaslight. And one of the people in that community, his name's Chad Fowler. He worked at a company called LivingSocial, which is still around, I think, but they were like growing just monstrously at that time and really couldn't hire enough people. And he made a bet with somebody else there at LivingSocial that he could take people just off the street, essentially, that had no programming experience at all, and in 6 months turn them into better developers than they were able to hire by taking people who knew a different language and retraining them in Ruby. So it was not even just like, can we hire developers and have them be productive? It was like, can we hire developers and have them be better than other places that we were sourcing them from? So they did this experiment where I forget whether it was 12 or 24, but they had 12 or 24 paid jobs that over 6 months were like, learn to be a developer was your job. And they, because they're a pretty huge startup at that time, they had like hundreds and hundreds of people apply for this job, or these 12 positions. And so they had like a really wide funnel, and were able to select people who presumably had a really high aptitude from it. But their success criteria was, if we could have half of the people coming out of this program be developers that we kept on at LivingSocial, that would be a success. We'd be happy with that. They hired all of them. All of them became developers of LivingSocial, and it really kind of was eye-opening for them and for the whole community, because they talked about it a lot, and it just kind of made everybody realize that you can take people and in a relatively short amount of time help them become developers that can do productive real work. So a lot of boot camps started after this, and some of the early ones like Dev Bootcamp came along not too far after that. And my own personal experience, back in 2014, I got to teach at a program called Dev Bootcamp in Chicago. And that program was a 3-month intensive program focused around Ruby on Rails, HTML, CSS, some SQL databases, kind of a full stack developer program. In 3 months, go from not having coded to full stack development. And I was really blown away with the final projects that people were able to create coming out of that program. I saw some stuff that people built that I was like, wow, I'd have to really think about how to do that as a developer with 20 years of experience. It was like not trivial, kind of hobby projects. It was interesting stuff. And seeing what they built and seeing them come out as absolutely capable developers, what surprised me is that with the employment market being as hot as it was, they weren't all immediately snatched up by companies needing developers. Instead, it was kind of a few months of struggle before they found that initial job. And most all of them did. They had like a 90% success rate over 6 months, but 6 months is a long time. And what I realized is there was a mismatch between companies that wanted to hire developers and people coming out of programs like this. And the mismatch was companies wanted to hire developers, but what they were looking for was developers with about 2 or 3 years of experience that were self-sufficient, that they had a comfort level that they could just give somebody a project and say go, and they could do it. And the developers coming out were, unproven. And it's not that they weren't capable, but there was like this risk scariness over here on the part of employers. And so basically I realized that there was kind of, a pretty basic supply-demand problem, if you will, where we had a huge supply of people that want to be developers and can become developers. We have a huge demand, but there's something wrong in the middle. And for me, that this apprenticeship program is our attempt to try to fill in that gap. And that's basically the idea in a nutshell. I talked to everybody that I could find that knew about software development apprenticeship and tried to gather experience from them and come up with this program. And basically what I look for in an apprentice, the level that I want people to be at, I started with the idea that my prototypical apprentice would be somebody coming out of a program like Dev Bootcamp, but I've realized over time that I've had absolutely as much, if not possibly more success with people that have just taught themselves to code using online resources or through other means. So what I've realized is it doesn't really matter how you do it. If you can learn to code at a fairly basic level, able to build something, it doesn't have to be hugely sophisticated, but able to actually build a real project that's interesting, but don't have job experience. This is kind of what I'm looking for. And kind of the criteria I asked myself, and usually by coding with somebody for just a few hours, I kind of can see that spark that, this person's going to be a good developer someday. They just need a chance to do it. And that's kind of what I'm looking for more than anything else. But the nuts and bolts of the program, how it works is we take apprentices, pardon me, we like to have apprentices in pairs. One thing that we learned very early on is a single apprentice by themselves in a team of experienced developers does not do nearly as well as apprentices that have other apprentices with them. There's something really important about having somebody else at your level to kind of help you along. Apprentices learn from one another. They help each other. They're kind of an example and somebody to, compare yourself to in a positive way, or realize that, hey, they're successful and they don't know a lot of stuff yet too. There's just something where apprentices together are way more successful than apprentices by themselves. And I've seen that kind of even work in larger than pair groups. We had, for this recent set of apprentices that we have going, we have 6 apprentices active right now. We actually took all 6 and put them together in a single team at the start of the program, and because they're all going to different teams at the same client. So we basically kept them together for 3 weeks and had them learn the technology and the systems at this large client. And we found that in that 3 weeks, they were like really productive, and they did a kind of example project using the technology stack at Kroger where they all are. And I was really impressed with what they were able to get done. So apprentices working together really is a good thing. But how it works typically is we have a pair of apprentices, possibly 2 pairs. We have them working with a mentor. A mentor is just somebody who's an experienced developer who is both actually writing code as part of that team, but also helping the apprentices along. That might be pairing with the apprentices, that might be kind of helping them out and answering questions. It's really kind of somebody who's there to make sure that the apprentices have what they need to be successful. And that unit of the mentor and the apprentices are then joining typically a larger team. The length of the apprenticeship is 6 months, and basically what we find is over 6 months somebody can go from knowing very little in the way of like concrete knowledge. You know, they may have never written a line of code in the particular programming language that that team is using. They obviously won't know any of the systems that that are going on in a complex organization. But over 6 months, the first time you see you're working with another developer and they're working on a particular kind of feature, you're going to be watching and asking questions of that, and that's fine. But the next time you do a similar feature, you're going to have seen it before. It's going to make a little bit more sense. Maybe you're going to be able to write some of the code. The third time, maybe you're going to be able to write a little bit more of the code. And what we find is just there's a pretty natural thing that happens organically over weeks and months where you're able to be more and more of an equal contributor. And by 6 months, we're able to take apprentices and have them become very much trusted, capable team members. They're not like senior developers, or they're not going to be designing a large system, but anything else that that team is doing, you can give that to that, at that point, former apprentice and have them work on it, and it's going to get done well. And that's kind of what we're looking for, is by the end of 6 months, and it's really a team decision, but by the end of 6 months, ideally that team you're on should say like, yes, I would trust Joe with any feature that we're working on here, and if you took Joe off my team, I would be sad and I would miss him, and we wouldn't be as productive without him. That's kind of the bar that I look for. And we've proven multiple times that that's absolutely doable. And we have people that started as apprentices. We started with our first apprentices. Our first set of apprentices were March of 2016, so a little over 2 years. And some of those very early, the very first apprentice we had is still working at the environment where she started. And she's been promoted since then and is doing really well. And we've had multiple pairs of apprentices since then that are still continuing on and doing well. So it absolutely can work. So let's talk about how you get to be an apprentice. The first step, of course, is applying on the website. I assume probably everybody's done that. If not, just go to teamgaslight.com and you can find the career section and the developer apprenticeship job there. Even if you've been trading email with me and come here, do go ahead and apply, because that gets you into our system so that we can make sure that we don't drop the ball and not follow up with anything. And it just helps us know where things are at. This is kind of the next step, and the goal of this, like I said, is to try to give you all the information that you need and answer all your questions about how apprenticeship works. I used to kind of do this one-on-one with everybody, and that's like a great way to get to know people. But I kind of found that I was kind of having the same conversation over and over again. So this is kind of an attempt to streamline that a little bit. The next thing that we do is a math and logic test. That's like, I think 60 minutes, 40 questions, something like that. And it's not so much about the math, and by math it's mostly story problems, kind of maybe at the level of algebra 1-ish, not super, I'm not expecting differential equations or something like that. But it's really more about how you think than how much math you know specifically. What I'm really trying to get a feel for is aptitude and problem-solving ability. One of the things that we've definitely learned about apprenticeship is your aptitude for learning is probably the most important factor in how successful you are going to be. So we're going to throw like tons and tons of new abstract concepts at you in over 6 months, and if you're able to, I show you a thing and it's new to you, and then the next day you've kind of internalized it and are able to apply it. That kind of thing is really kind of the hallmark of an apprentice that's going to really excel and do well. The next part of it, we want to spend at least an hour, and we might do this more than once with multiple mentors. We want to see you actually writing code on an app that you've built. So we want to see you submit an app to us, and I'll show some examples here at the end. And we want to have you think of, okay, what's a feature that I can add to this app that it doesn't do yet? And then it'll just mainly be you working on adding that feature to your code base for about an hour or so. And we'll be there to bounce ideas off of and talk to and that kind of thing. We won't really be writing the code with you like it would be on a real pair programming environment. And it's mainly just a chance to see how you organize code, but more than that, how you understand your code, how you think about code, when you run into problems, how you figure out what's going on in a logical way. Looking stuff up is bonus points. We don't expect you to know everything going in and have it all sorted out. We expect you to run into problems and have stuff break and not work, because that's part of the job of a developer. It's really about when stuff doesn't work, because it won't. How do you reason about that? How can you go I don't know what's going on, but I wonder if it could be X. Can I develop an experiment that will tell me if it's X or not? And that's called debugging. Basically, it's just like the scientific method over and over again. It's I don't know what's going on, but can I eliminate one thing? Okay, I eliminated one thing, it's not that. Blah, 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 and then eventually you go oh, it's this thing. So that's the kind of thing that we look for, is can you figure stuff out? Can you reason about code? Can you solve problems? Those sorts of skills are the most important indicator. And then once that coding session, and we might do more than once. Sometimes it's we see some things, but we want to give you another session with another mentor to really make sure that you're in the right place to be successful. But once that is complete and we feel you're ready to do an apprenticeship, then we would start looking for a team for you to join. At that point, it's kind of a waiting game, and it's basically based on when we have a client ready to start a team and when we have a mentor available to start a team for that client. So right now, for example, we have 6 apprentices going on 3 different teams with 3 different mentors, and that's as many mentors as we have right now. So if I were to start a new client, I would be helping a new mentor get started with that team, or I would be waiting till this current set of apprentices wraps up, which is September. That time frame is always more difficult to predict than I would like. But what I try to do is have people going through this process constantly, and then if the timeline lines up and you're available when we have a team ready to go, I have some people that I know are going to be good apprentices ready to go. And obviously, I don't expect you to wait for me. You should be out there beating all the bushes that you can. And if something comes along in the meantime, that's great. And we're happy to keep, talking about, we're having to keep getting together and seeing what you're working on and seeing if we can help you keep learning along the way. Okay, so what does Apprentice actually do day to day, week to week? Obviously, that most important thing is an apprentice is working on real production code. So one of the things that is maybe, I've heard of other apprenticeship programs where they're just kind of programs where you come in and maybe you gain experience working on something that is maybe tangential to what that company does, or just something that they've made up to keep these apprentices busy while they learn. But with our program, we are embedding you with a team that has real stuff to get done. Some of the first apprentices built some of the code that's still on the front page of Kroger.com. If you go in and look for a store, that component is something that those first apprentices built. So obviously continuing to learn, and mostly you're going to do that by actually working on real code as part of the team. We do a book club, typically weekly, where we're going through books about how to write better code. We start with a book called Apprenticeship Patterns that's a book about other people's collected experience on how to become a developer and common problems and solutions that they've encountered. We usually get together as all of the apprentices across teams and across clients and write some code together once a week. Right now we're going through some material that is a set of blog posts that are computer science concepts for people that don't have a CS degree. So it's kind of like the background of computer science that you might not necessarily get on the job, but is useful to know and understand. So we're going through some of that. Weekly, your mentor will get together with you and check in and see how it's going, make sure everything's going well. And then usually every other month, we'll have kind of team evaluations where we mainly are trying to answer the question based on the progress that we've seen from the apprentice to, from when they started to wherever they are now. So if it's after 2 months, it's 2 months. It's after 4 months, it's 4 months. But based on that trajectory, do we think that at the end of 6 months, they'll be ready to be hired as a developer? And that's kind of the conversation, and we want to let you know whether you're on track or not, basically. And that's what we try to do doing those evaluations. I kind of alluded to this, but our program is a little bit different than some other apprenticeships in the way that they're run. One of the things that's different about ours is a lot of the apprenticeships out there are growing developers for that organization. So, for instance, a consulting company like ours, and we've done a little bit of this, but this is not like the main thing that we do with apprenticeship. A consulting company would be bringing in apprentices and then growing them into developers for that company. And what we realized is the amount of developers that we could hire here at Gaslight is far less than the need for a program like this to help grow developers for other clients. So we couldn't really make a dent in terms of the amount of people that need a way to break into software development just by having apprentices here at Gaslight. We could do maybe a couple a year or something like that. But at this pace, we'd like to do more like 12 and then eventually 24 and kind of keep growing it. There's a huge demand for developers. And so what we do is we partner with clients that need to hire developers, and we're going into an organization and helping them grow development talent. So it's kind of an apprenticeship as a service model rather than just come and be an apprentice and work for Gaslight. So that is something I have to be really clear on because a lot of people come in and I like working at Gaslight. We have a nice space. I love it here, but the projected outcome of being an apprentice with us is probably you're going to work for one of our clients. So like knowing that going in is important. We don't want you to like have this idea that like, oh, you can work for Gaslight at the end and then us not be able to hire you and you be sad. You know, we want to be upfront that this is what's going on and this is what we're trying to do. And we try to work with organizations, and I think we have a good track record of organizations that are good places to become a software developer, that are good places to learn, that are doing things well, that are not like, you know, soul crushing, you know, that advocate continuing to learn and understand the realities of software development and things like that. So, yeah. The other thing I guess that's different, and you know, this is not a program like some other programs where you can go build experience for 6 months and then hopefully have an easier time finding a job after that. This is really designed specifically for, you're going to join a team, you're going to start actually becoming a contributing developer on that team, and then at the end of 6 months, you're just going to keep doing what you were doing. Like the end goal of apprenticeship is not you have an easier time finding a job. It's like you already have a job, you're already with that team. Basically the way it works is you're just getting paid from somebody different with benefits and hopefully a pay increase at the end of 6 months. You're continuing to work as part of that team, probably doing the exact same thing you were doing the day before. So it's more of like a guided path into a development job than a, you know, a way to build more experience, although it does that too. Let's see. Yeah, what makes a good apprentice? So one of the things we learned really early on is it matters a lot more how quickly you learn than what you know when you start. And so this made up graph of meaningless data is kind of trying to illustrate that point. You know, we've definitely had apprentices that maybe knew more about the specific technology that we were using there. Maybe they knew more JavaScript coming in and that we were doing a lot of JavaScript, whatever. But what we found is if they didn't learn as quickly, the apprentice that like came in knowing like very, very little, that just learned really, really fast, eventually those lines would cross. And, oh, I'm gonna be out of the shot, sorry. Eventually those lines cross, and it's really the one that learns faster that's successful in the end. So, you know, originally we kind of thought that like, yeah, it's probably important that the apprentice have as much experience as possible with the technologies that they're using at that company. And I don't want to say that like that's completely unimportant, because obviously it's like the more you know already, the less overwhelming it is for you, and the less you know, the less there is to learn before you're productive. But what we found is if you have the right expectations that no, we don't expect you to be contributing by yourself on day one. We expect you to learn. We expect you to start confused and gradually become less confused and more capable. As long as the expectations are correct on both sides, the client knows what we're doing and knows what to expect, 6 months is absolutely enough time for somebody who's capable and interested and enthusiastic and learns fast to become really good. So, so this is more what it's about, is trying to identify people who like they have the qualities that help them become a good developer. And it's still, frankly, something that I'm continuing to learn how to identify. I don't have all the answers here, and I'm not trying to pretend that I do. But I'm trying to, I guess, come up with some things that I've seen in people where almost every time I see these things, that person turns out that they're successful and they're a good developer. And some of them are obvious, right? If you like have always enjoyed coding since you were introduced to it, if that's you, that's probably a pretty good sign. You know, I've talked to people that like they learned to code when they were a kid just because they thought it was fun, and maybe they didn't do it and ended up doing something else and just came back to it. You know, they generally turned out to be pretty good. You know, there's this thing that happens where like you get stuck on a programming problem and like you just can't like let it go, and you like you look up and several hours have gone by, and you're still chewing on this thing, and you know, it doesn't even matter so much like were you able to solve it or not in that particular session, because quite honestly, you're probably going to be more successful if you actually stop and get a night of sleep, and then you'll wake up and the answer will be like, oh, duh. But if you have that quality of like, man, it's just like I'm so into this that it's hard to let go and I lose track of time, that's also sort of like a common thread that like that tends to be a good sign in terms of how much you stay at it and how successful you're likely to be. It tends to be there's a really strong correlation between math and physics specifically, oddly enough, where people who at least don't hate and you know, I'm not of that background that like I was not like a hardcore mathematician or anything like that, but I did find in school math wasn't like a huge struggle bus for me. It was at times, especially when I got to university. You know, calculus was a slog for me. But especially at the earlier phases, like math tended to come fairly easily. And I would say that probably if like math was something that you just hated and more like it was just awful all the time, I don't know. There's something there where there's a relationship, and I don't know precisely what it is. I do know that people who really dig math and do well at it, and people who were getting a physics degree specifically and then decide they'd rather become programmers, and I've had a few of them, and they all seem to do really well. And I don't know why. It just seems to be a thing. Maybe I should probably add music to that list. I know a lot of musicians turned developers, and there's actually a pretty well-studied thing called the math-music correlation, where people who are musicians a lot of times tend to be interested in math, and that seems to extend over to programming as well. So, and I'm not saying like if that's not you, you can't be a developer, but I do kind of see this pattern where people who are into those things tend to be developers tend to end up being good developers. But probably more important than anything else is how curious you are about figuring this stuff out. You know, yeah, I guess that's really all I can say about that. So I kind of feel like there are two kind of continuums of I guess qualities that tend to indicate whether you're going to be successful at that. And they're not quite the same, but they're definitely related. One kind of scale to think about is how easy is it for you to learn new things related to coding. That's not to say like it should be easy all the time. It's not easy for me all the time. I'm totally not saying that. But on the scale of, you know, I can, you know, read a few tutorials and maybe be able to build something versus, you know, I need somebody to tell me what to type. You know, along that scale, along those ends, if you're more toward the end of I can follow tutorials and generally be able to put something together, that's probably a good sign. And then closely related to it is like how much do you enjoy it? It's, you know, you can be a successful developer and it doesn't have to be like the thing that you would choose to spend all your waking minutes at. But the more you enjoy it naturally, the more likely you are to be successful. And we kind of have a lot of debates in the programming community of this word that we used to use a lot called passion. Like how much are you into programming? And we kind of went away from the word passion because it really is something that comes and goes. And it's also hard to manufacture, and what we really always realized, I think, is curiosity is probably a better word to describe it. It's like, are you interested in this stuff? You know, you may not be excited about it all the time. Nobody's excited about it all the time is what it comes down to. But like if you're not, you know, interested enough to try to figure out how things are working, that's probably not the best fit. Oh yeah, so I kind of talked through this already. So along the path of going from apprentice to developer, it's not easy. You know, it's going to be a real challenge, of course. But definitely along the way, we've seen some things where apprentices have struggled with, and we've absolutely been able to help them get past that. And then we've seen some other things where, at least so far, I've had less success with. So a few things that I've absolutely seen. I've seen people come in with no experience at all in a corporate environment and what that culture is like. And that can be a challenge for somebody, and it could be a challenge for the team that they're on. And I've had people where I kind of had to pull them aside and say, like, hey, your team is seeing this specific behavior where it kind of doesn't look like you're paying attention to, you know, or you know, interested in what's going on. And, you know, you might be, but can you like kind of indicate that to your team a little bit more so they know that you're engaged in what's going on a little bit more. And that may seem like a little thing, and it kind of is, but if it happens enough time where your team's like, I don't think this guy cares about what's going on, that's a real problem. But we were able to help this person realize what was going on, get past that, and you know, they ended up getting hired, and they're doing very well. The other things that we can help with are kind of the more obvious ones, giving you space and permission to learn. You know, we try to make sure that you know, the client has, you know, the right expectations of an apprentice going in. And you know, giving a safe place to mess things up. And what I mean by that is, you know, making sure that the environment is such that you're not going to be, say, doing something silly like writing code directly on a production system or something like that. We're going to make sure that like the team is developing software correctly so that you can't easily like break things that are going to bring down production environments that millions of dollars are going through or something like that. You know, you will be working on real important systems, but there are lots of safeguards in a good, mature software development process so that it should be safe for you to, frankly, you know, make a mess the first time you're attempting to implement something, go over with guidance and try it again and make it better to the point where it's like, yeah, this is good, let's ship this code to production. It should be safe for you to like try stuff, to mess it up. That should be okay. So some of the things that we haven't yet figured out how to help with as much. The attitude of like, just, you need to tell me exactly what to do. At the beginning, yes, there's absolutely some of that goes on, and that's okay. Like, this is a whole brand new thing. We're gonna give you as much pointers and guidance and learning material as we possibly can to help you be successful. But there comes a point during the apprenticeship where you have to be able to be figuring out what to do with less and less guidance. And sometimes that doesn't happen for people, and that's a really hard situation. There's also a thing that I've seen develop where, you know, people are just kind of afraid to try stuff or afraid to, you know, jump in and code in an environment with other people and just kind of want to like hang back and watch. And hanging back and watching is a fine way to learn at the beginning, but eventually something that people need to grow past. And if it's like, you know, 3/4 of the way through and we're not seeing that, that also can be a really hard situation. And really what both things are about really is eventually making progress towards self-sufficiency. Eventually, what we want to see out of a successful apprentice is not, is that we could give them any feature that that team would work on and they could get it done. And here's what I mean by get it done. They may not know how to do it yet, and that's okay, but they know a lot more who to ask so that they can figure it out. By the end of the apprenticeship, I want to, like, the most successful apprentices, the ones that get hired and they're working out and they love them, are ones where it's like, they would have a feature that I didn't know how to do, but they would know organizationally who they needed to go talk to start figuring stuff out, and they would be coming back and like sharing that stuff with me. That's where we want you to get to eventually, because that's the actual job of being a developer. It's just over and over stuff that nobody else has any idea how to do, and you're like figuring it out together with your team. If you can't get past that, like, I need somebody to show me how to do this, eventually that doesn't work out. So let's talk about the coding project and what I'm looking for there. Ideally, I want an application that has some level of interactivity. I don't want something that's just purely like shows data and that's it. I'm looking for something original, not just a tutorial that you followed step by step. That's a fine starting point, but what I suggest people do is following a tutorial is a great way to learn a new technology stack that you might want to work with, but then like take that tutorial and do it again, but build something similar that's your own thing. So like if it's a to-do list app, build another kind of list of some kind. Build a recipe management app. I don't know, do something like is similar to the tutorial, but like adds something new and original. I don't care too much about what technology stack that you choose. If it's something where you can put your code somewhere that I can get to it. I guess that's kind of implied, but I really should call that out. Yes?
Is that like the different languages?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Like HTML, CSS, jQuery, JavaScript, React, Angular, Vue, all?
Yeah, so it's more like, I don't care whether you use React or Angular. I don't care whether you use Ruby or Python as a server-side programming language. It doesn't matter to me, whether you use jQuery or nothing. It matters a lot more like, were you able to successfully build an app? Do you understand it? Are you able to work with it? Is the code organized in a way that is logical and makes sense? Those sorts of things are more important. I've paired with people on programming languages where I was less familiar with, and at this point they're all kind of similar enough that I could at least figure out what was going on and keep up, and that's totally fine. And I also always, I should have put this in here, but one of the most common questions I get is like, what programming language or framework should I focus on? Because I don't want to choose the wrong one. I want to choose the most marketable one, and I totally get that. And for where you're at, that can seem daunting and scary, the prospect of choosing the wrong thing and having a harder time finding a job. I get it. And the rest of the programming language industry is trying to hire you based on like, do you have all the boxes that they can check that says I have experience with these 5 things? But for apprenticeship, it doesn't matter. And really, in the industry, it doesn't matter either. That's just a whole mess I don't have time to get into. But what actually matters is how you can learn and having the core skills of software development. The rate of change in the industry is like so fast that you're going to have to continue to learn stuff anyway. And there's a danger, particularly for like people new into the field, to kind of be bouncing between different things and never actually learn anything well enough to be productive in it. So it can be really compelling to say like, oh, something new came along. I wonder if that's better than the thing that I've been learning. And maybe it is, but you're still probably better off continuing to learn the thing that you picked initially and getting better at it for where you're at now. So that's why I don't care so much about what particular programming language or tech stack or framework. That matters a lot less. So I thought I'd go through a few examples. Looks like I just picked 3 out. And they kind of, I think, have a pretty wide variation in terms of how complicated they are. But these are all apprentices that are either current apprentices or have successfully graduated and are working as developers. But this is a little Connect 4 game. And, this is actually, oh, you know what? This is actually the code, but let me actually show it running first. Yeah, here it is. This is just straight up JavaScript, and it's a Connect 4 game. Everybody played Connect 4? So you drop the things into the slots. We'll just be dumb here so we can let red win. And sure enough, on the last one, it detects that the red player won. So, not super fancy, but interactive. It's written in JavaScript. It uses React under the covers to actually do the board and the circles and all that stuff. I think when we actually paired on it, it did both. It detected horizontal wins, and maybe we needed to add support for vertical wins or diagonal wins. I don't remember, but that's the app that he built, and that's the feature that we worked on together. Another one. This maybe is on the more polished end, and this is from a couple years back. This is Miles, one of our early apprentices. This is his music quiz app. And what it will do is it will give you a note on a staff and ask you which note it is. Anybody read music?
Keyboard like years ago. So it's a quarter note, and it's like 3 things to higher, right? C.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Oh well, I'm giving it away.
E sharp.
There you go. And then let's just get one wrong. So it tells you if you got it wrong. So yeah, that's basically the app. There's features where you can actually like log in and register. You can switch between the clefs. So if you want to like make me embarrass myself, I totally don't know bass clef at all. Oh. I guess I'd have to restart somehow. Maybe that doesn't work. But anyway, this was Miles's app, a little more substantial. What we did when we paired, he already had a keyboard image ready to go, and we added support for being able to like click on the note in the keyboard to actually guess at the note that way. So that was kind of more on the complex side. Another example app, and this is kind of an interesting one because it's kind of like one where he started with a tutorial that's kind of more step by step, and then kind of tried to extend on that. Sasha, he's working now. He graduated from the apprenticeship a year or two ago. He's a math nerd, and so he started with the initial calculator and then turned it into what he called the Frankulator, Franken Calculator. So rather than just like simple addition and subtraction and things, this would have buttons like, give me the lowest prime factor or the greatest prime factor, I forget which one. Give me whether this is a number. A triangular number. I don't know what that is. But he has a bunch of mathematical series and different things where it will tell it whether it's a prime and whether it's a good prime and all these different things that I can't explain to you, I'm afraid. Go ahead.
What language do you use on this one?
Oh, this is also in JavaScript. Yeah, this is all JavaScript. I think he might have started with just simple jQuery and then rewrote it in React at some point. But like I don't have this in my list of examples, but I had another guy who wrote a dice rolling game, also in JavaScript with no framework at all. And just pure vanilla JavaScript, no jQuery. He was like all about like limiting himself to learn JavaScript really well. And he did great. You know, he's working right now. So like I say, JavaScript is a common choice just because it's so accessible as far as like, if you have a web browser, you can run JavaScript. It's also not super cumbersome on the scale of, you know, you can write a few languages of JavaScript or a few lines of JavaScript and it will do something that you can see, versus if you choose a language like C++ or Java, you need a compiler and then, you know, you have a lot more work to do something simple. So languages vary in terms of how little code you need to do something productive. And languages like JavaScript and Ruby are really easy to get started with. Whereas languages like Java and C++, they're used a lot, but it's a steeper hill to climb till you actually get to see something useful. So I guess that's kind of a good point. For me, I'm happy to work with you on whatever language and tech stack that you choose. If you haven't done anything at all yet as far as learning to code, choosing a language like JavaScript or Ruby where it's easier to see something done is going to be easier for you because there's like a feedback loop that happens where I can write just a little code and be like, hey, look, I made a thing happen. And then it's like, oh, that was fun. I wonder if I could do a little bit more and make another thing happen. And if that loop's nice and tight, it just kind of draws you in and keeps you going. And a lot of times if people like don't have any, need a suggestion for what to look at, Ruby on Rails can be another good choice because there's a lot of tutorials that will take you through building a pretty fully functional web app in like a couple hours and having that, that positive feedback cycle helps build excitement because, building that excitement and having fun at this is going to be really important to keep you going when it's not fun, because it's not always fun. So yeah, those are the examples that I kind of have to show you guys. One more thing I definitely wanted to point out. If you're not at the level where you feel like you can build an app kind of at this level, and or just are really early on, or really, I won't even say that, but I am starting a study group. It will meet here in our office on Saturday mornings. And you can search the Meetup website to find it really easily. But we are going to be going through the Harvard CS50 class. Harvard CS50 is the intro to computer science for CS majors and non-CS majors at Harvard. And they have for many years now been making it freely available online. So all of the lectures, all of the assignments, all of the, even a lot of the office hours and things are all completely available for free. We've had a number of apprentices that have started with this class and have gotten to the level of being an apprentice. So what we're gonna do is we're basically just gonna have a group that meets, talks about the assignments. There's gonna be people here that are already developers available to answer questions if you get stuck on an assignment. Hopefully you'll be willing to show your work to other people, and it's just gonna be a study group office hours kind of thing. So we're not gonna actually watch the videos. We're gonna have you do that ahead of time. But that's the plan. When we'll start with an organizational meeting this Saturday at 10 a.m. So if you're interested in that, I think we have like 10 more slots or something available there.
You said this Saturday?
This Saturday, yep. This Saturday, 10 a.m. right here. And do register on the meetup site if you would, just so, because there's already like 25 people and I don't want to run out of space. Let's see. I think that's pretty much the material that I have. So yeah, what questions, what didn't I cover that I can answer questions about? And
Probably won't be able to make it to this Saturday, but I would like to.
yeah, this Saturday in particular is just like the info session, and I'll try to actually put together like a week by week breakdown syllabus of what we're doing. So because everything's available online, if you want to do it on your own and then come when you can, that's a totally reasonable thing to do. Yeah, yeah. So if you miss a week, can't make the first week, it's totally fine. Yeah.
So let's say I have my app built.
Yes.
I'm going to submit it to you in 1 week.
Uh-huh.
How soon would that code air session?
It kind of,
A week out or 2 weeks? Or?
I would, yeah, it really can vary quite a bit. I try to do it within a week or two.
Okay.
I don't, and if I go longer than that, it's because something happened and I lost an email or forgot, or like ping me again, because I've dropped the ball on you if that goes longer than, let's say if I don't get back to you in a week, you should absolutely reach out to me again. And don't worry about bugging me, that's fine. I'd rather have you bug me than like me lose track of you and be a jerk, so.
Then let's say you do, assuming you do that a couple of times for like an hour or two.
Yep.
And then I guess maybe after the third or fourth,
Generally even a couple, we usually have a pretty good feel for where you're at that point.
you guys will pick A and A.
Yeah, what we usually would try to do is say like, yeah, you're ready to go, or here's what, either, okay, this app is like not sophisticated enough, here's a little bit more that you can do to make it better, or, here's some things that you can keep learning to hopefully reach the level of apprentice. We try not to just say like, no, you're hopeless, go away. We try to give people more to learn.
When it comes to like sort of like the code philosophy, is it sort of a test-driven environment, or is it?
That is, yes. If you're at the level where you can write tests for your code, that's a very strong indicator that you might be reaching the level of being a successful apprentice. I don't necessarily always expect that, but it's absolutely one of the core things that will be focused on teaching you during the apprenticeship itself, is how to write unit tests for your code. So actually, now that you mention it, one of the things that actually this apprentice, Sasha, did really well, and he came to me early on, so I actually had a good few months to work with him before I had a team ready for him to join. So even past the point where I knew that like, Sasha's gonna be really good, I just kept helping him learn, and he just kept at it. So he got pretty familiar with writing unit tests well ahead of him joining us. So what unit tests are about are unit tests are ways to test pieces of your code before you put it together into a larger app. So rather than having to see if your app works by typing in a number and clicking the right button and looking to see if it got the right result, what we're able to do as developers is write code that tests our code. And so that by the time he actually hooked up the user interface to that button that does the factorial check, he already was really sure that that factorial check did the right thing. And test-driven development is the practice of writing these tests as we write our code. And it's one of the things that is really important in working in a complex environment with a team, because manually testing your apps is just a huge slowdown. It's a good way to introduce bugs into production, and it also makes it much harder to maintain and work with a complex app. So, if I'm working in a large system, I want to know that all the pieces work correctly by themselves before I try to put it all together. And unit tests are the key way that we do that. So if you've already learned to code and are looking for what are my next steps to get better, unit testing is always one of the first things I point people at. So, yeah.
So when are you kind of expecting to see the apps being emailed to you? I'm just trying to figure out how much time I have to make it as cool as possible.
Whenever you're ready, it's kind of up to you. I don't have an immediate, okay, I need to make a decision about who's going to be on a team in the next 2 weeks. I don't have a deadline in front of me like that. If I do, I'll let people know that. But right now, I absolutely expect by no later than September, I'll have a whole nother sets of apprentices ready to teams ready to start up. But as far as a timeline for a cutoff, I don't really have one. And what I generally try to do is tell people, hey, I think you're at the level where you could join a team, and then when I have a team ready to start, ideally I have exactly as many people in that spot as I have slots on the team. If I don't, I have to decide, and that's always hard to do. But I don't try to do it based on time. I try to do it based on best fit. So
is it I'm guessing that it's less of a rolling admission and more of we're coming up to September, and in October you see who you best have fit, and that's when you let people know?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
This example, Sasha was good to go, and he kept on working for months and months until this.
He did.
So
Yeah.
was he working? He had a full-time job doing this, or how did he?
No, he
So I guess I'm trying to figure out.
he moved to Cincinnati, and he was a professional. Well, I don't know if you can even use the word professional. He was making his living by playing Texas Hold'em over at the casino. And he was like, this is really hard, and I don't like it, and it's really lonely. I think I want to do something else. And so he just did nothing but learn to code for months and months. And I don't know how he supported himself, and I don't know how that worked, and I have no idea. But that's what he did. And he got really good at it, and he's a really good developer.
I'm just wondering how much time you guys
Oh.
give people who have full-time jobs to tell them, hey,
I'm sorry, how much time?
if somebody's working full-time, to give the employer hey, I'm moving on to this.
Oh, I absolutely would not, don't give notice until I tell you, I have the team ready for you to start on X date.
Of course, yeah, okay.
But I try to make sure that, ideally there'd be a few weeks of notice. I'm certainly no less than 2 weeks, and
Okay, did that be 2 months advance notice, or it's just hey, 2 weeks, we're starting, so.
It's usually, it's usually not 2 weeks. It's usually more a month-ish.
Okay, so you get it's a good amount of time to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
everything
Yeah, I try not to, yeah, I try to let people know as much time out as I can, but it's probably, yeah, it's been averaging probably a month or so ahead. I know that there's a slot ready to go and a team ready to start.
Once you say you're good to go, that's
Yes.
You're committed.
Yes, I will be absolutely clear with like, can you start on this date
okay.
at this rate and not ambiguous about that, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And yeah, saying like, I think you could be a successful apprentice is not the same. So don't quit your job yet if you get to that point. Like,
No, I'm just
yeah.
curious because it's like, oh, we need you to start like in 3 days. It's like, well, okay.
No.
I kinda have to
Of course,
go
yeah.
on this bridge.
Well, so what I actually do is when I have a slot, when I know about a team starting up, and I usually know at least a month out, I go and I talk to each person and say like, how much time do you need to get ready? And I try to pick the start date based on when the apprentices that I feel like are going to be the best are ready to go. The only time when I've had people where it's like, how much notice do you have to give? Is because I had something change where I had like a new team. I knew I had 2 teams and somebody decided to add a 3rd team all of a sudden, or I had people who were committed to join me and then they decided to do something else and I had a slot all of a sudden open up. Those are the situations where it could be as, I could be basically saying like, how much notice do you need to give? But even then, like, if you have a full-time job, I absolutely will respect your needing to give 2 weeks notice. And I've never yet passed on somebody because they couldn't give enough notice. I don't think I just let them start a week late. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah.
Will this stream be available right after?
Oh yeah, totally. I don't know if I have that URL, but
And the slides are on GitHub. I just saw.
yes, the slides are all there on GitHub. Yep. If you go to if you search and find the Gaslight channel on YouTube, that's where it will be. Yeah.
Are you guys actively looking for more clients to place apprentices in, so you can have more than, yeah? Okay.
Yeah. We are, and we're also looking for more mentors, so kind of all 3 pipelines. Yeah,
One last one.
sure.
When the next session or group starts, how many apprentice people are you looking to bring on? 6? Because of the last one, or?
I would, to be honest, I would like to start apprentices in larger teams. So if I had my druthers, I'd try to scale that up to more like 12. But it's really based on like a discussion we have with the client. I think that there's potential longer term to say like, let's keep the apprentices together for maybe more of the apprenticeship and have the balance be, right now we have like a typical team would be like 8 developers or something like that, and then we have 2 apprentices joining them. But I think you could do something where you had like a mentor and an experienced dev and a group of like 4 to 6 apprentices. They wouldn't do the same, the same level of productivity as an experienced team, but I think over 6 months that team could be very productive and those apprentices could be really successful. That would be a different model, but that's sort of the direction I could see it going, and that would be larger teams and more apprentices. That's what I'd like to do. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream now anyway. But that doesn't mean we have to stop talking.